Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of The Expendables 3. So, I was really eager to check this movie out at first. I loved The Expendables 1, and I loved The Expendables 2 just as much, if not more so. They're not great movies by any stretch of the imagination, but they are awesome movies, and everything about this project looked cool. I liked the casting additions to the trailers. Granted, I got sick and tired of that one TV spot they kept playing, but otherwise, this film should have been epic, and I thought it would be epic until it was released illegally online. I despise film piracy. To me, the people who are responsible for getting it out on the internet should be prosecuted, and they get no sympathy from me when they ultimately are imprisoned and lose all of their possessions for it. And I have no respect for the people who took advantage of it being leaked and downloaded it themselves. To me, that kind of shit contributes to what I perceive to be the death of cinema, and even worse, it contributes to the death of this franchise. There possibly won't be an Expendables 4 because of all the people who watched it online, so thanks for that, fuckers. I just despise film piracy, so it is a very touchy issue with me. And that pretty much spelled the beginning of the end for The Expendables 3. Not just because, people were watching it online and not paying for, tickets, even though obviously that is going to leave a dent in the sales, but the negative word of mouth was really the crippler. If the bad reviews didn't start coming in until a couple of days or even a week prior to its big release, I don't think that would have stopped its momentum. But because everybody has been talking about how disappointing and bad the film apparently is a month prior to its big release, that is really going to spoil people's excitement levels. Even me, the biggest mark for this franchise, I went from, thinking that this was going to be one of the coolest films of this year, at least the one I was really looking forward to the most, to not really giving a shit within the week prior to it finally coming out. And even when I got up in the morning and got ready to go to the theaters, I was like, oh, well, better lower those expectations. So that is really going to hurt the box office numbers, because if a big fan like me feels that way, then I don't even want to know what the casual fans are feeling like. But also, in a lot of ways, the film bombing makes sense, even if you take out the piracy. The Expendables 3 doesn't really have a target audience. Well, let me ask this. Is the film as bad as everyone says it is? I don't think so. In fact, I thought it was an acceptable action movie, and sometimes even a very enjoyable one. But the problem is even though it's passable in that regard, it is a failure as a sequel. And the people involved, they had this big marketing ploy where they wanted to broaden the audience. They wanted to appeal to a younger generation, and to me that really does contradict the gimmick of this franchise, which is being a nostalgia trip. Now, I understand why they would try something like this, but the problem is that if you have not seen The Expendables 2, you're probably not going to see The Expendables 3, even if they did do a PG-13 rating or, brought in many younger faces. That's just common sense. So to see The Expendables 3, you'd still have to be a fan of its predecessors, at least in some regard. So in the end, all they did is alienate the established fans while not bringing in any new fans. Good job, guys. But when I wasn't thinking about how the movie had shot itself in the foot in regards to how it treated the gimmick, I will concede that I enjoyed myself more than not. I was really impressed with the spectacle on display, despite the fact that it was declawed by the PG-13 rating. That rating really confuses me just because The Expendables 2 tried to be PG-13 once, and boy, the entire internet felt those waves. Everybody was furious, and the studio felt so much pressure that they changed it back into its rightful R rating. Yeah, I didn't hear a peep in regards to The Expendables 3. I only found out that it was PG-13 a couple of weeks before its official release. so that's too bad. I really felt that the Expendables 3 would have been more comfortable with the R rating, because the editing definitely at times undermines the action, because they're trying so hard to obscure the blood and make sure that the film never becomes too graphic, even though it is edgier than your usual PG-13 movie. It just, I think the action scenes would have had a smoother flow if this was a rated R movie. But otherwise, I thought there was a pretty good variety with the action scenes. It combines motorcycles, tanks, helicopters. There's a lot of high-powered weaponry, explosions, shootouts. And even though the lack of blood is very noticeable, I did think the sound design was really good. God, that's really all I have to say there. I liked how the director shot the action scenes. I agreed with a lot of his angles, which I thought amplified the action. And the film does have more of a visual style than I think the trailers made it seem like. Admittedly, I think it's not as compelling of a visual style as its predecessors, but it has its own look, it has its own tone, and the director did a lot better with Red Hill, which I was a big fan of, but I thought he did fine here. And his failures, I believe, tie more into what the studio wanted than what he wanted. But above everything, I did think the action itself was pretty good. I will say this though, that there is a lot less martial arts action this time around. With the first two films, they were just straight up action movies that happened to have some, kung fu fighting. This film has practically none. Even though Dolph Lundgren and Jet Li are here, Jet Li only appears for like 3 seconds, and he has a legitimate health issue right now that keeps him from being able to film any elaborate fight scenes, and Dolph Lundgren, I'm pretty sure, is incapable of doing it. He looks like he could barely walk, much less fight. So that might disappoint you. I did like Jason Statham's fight scene, though, even though it's pretty short and it's intermixed with so much else that's going on. I thought that actually turned out pretty well. The finale between Mel Gibson and Sylvester Stallone, though, is about as weak as you'd imagine. I don't know what else they could have done by having those two characters fight, so I won't hold that against the movie. Okay, so I thought it was acceptable as an action film, but let's talk about the story, because the film's desire to market itself to a younger audience really actually has an adverse effect on the script. I really felt like there was some backstage war going on, that you had some people who wanted to make a true Expendables sequel and they knew what fans wanted, but then other people who did not understand the appeal of the franchise, but once again wanted to make a more marketable film. So let's start with the first act. The film opens with the Expendables rescuing Wesley Snipes' character, who he was part of the original group, the first Expendables, which I think in itself is kind of odd, considering how Wesley Snipes at least looks younger than all of the other Expendables. I don't know if he actually is, but also his prime was during the 90s, whereas Stallone and Lundgren were around in the 80s, so I almost feel like he should be one of the newer guys, not the older ones, but whatever. I'm sure that if he was available during the Expendables 1's production, he probably would be playing Terry Crews's part. But I could live with that. It wasn't a big deal, especially as Wesley Snipes is a lot of fun. Now, I've always liked Wesley Snipes. I think he's a good actor. Unlike most action stars who have a lot of charisma and presence but aren't very good when it comes to line delivery, I actually think Wesley Snipes is one of the best. He's just a naturally good actor who happens to also be an action star. But I really felt that Blade had a negative effect on his career in the long run, even though it's one of his biggest hits, because after Blade he always plays the serious stoic guy, and even though he does that well, it does get old, whereas prior to that he was much more of a lively personality, and he's more or less playing that same kind of role here. He's having a lot of fun, he's very goofy and eccentric, and Wesley Snipes is he was perfect casting for this character once you get past his age. But the whole thing is, all right, well, they spent so much time rescuing this character, he's going to be important throughout the rest of the story. He's going to tie into the primary plot somehow. Right? Nope. After that first act, he just becomes another face in the crowd. He barely does anything of notice. So his entire rescue sequence ultimately felt kind of pointless. They also, emphasize the dynamic where he's part of the old guard, and all the other Expendables are the newer, younger, not quite as good guys compared to him. At least that's how he feels. But that becomes obsolete as soon as the actual young people come, and suddenly that whole dynamic has been destroyed and totally replaced with this new one. So it's annoying when by the second act you realize that the entire first act was unnecessary. So, alright, let's get into the second act. This is where the younger crew starts coming in. You have Kellen Lutz, who gave such a show-stopping performance in The Legend of Hercules, which was totally the best movie of this year. I'm being sarcastic. He's kind of the leader. He's the wild card, but he does have some, positive leadership attributes to where they almost kind of suggest that he's going to be the next leader of the Expendables, which is kind of a horrifying thought when you think about it. But even though they establish him as the wild card and the rebel and so on, all of those personality traits almost dissipate as soon as he is introduced. After that, he just once again becomes one of the other faces. He does very little of notice. I think he was on his motorcycle during the finale, but otherwise it didn't seem like he really did a lot. But I'll get into that later. There's I can't think of her name, but she's an MMA fighter. She's the tough chick. That's all there is to her. I don't know why they didn't get at least an established actress like Gina Carano. She's done a few movies that would have made more sense, whereas this lady, even though she's not as terrible as I think everybody says she is, she has no movie credibility, so I don't know why she's there. Apparently they wanted to get Milla Jovovich, which would have been better, but she wasn't available. And then you have two other guys who have absolutely no personalities, and you won't even remember their names. So these guys are all very boring to watch, but you know what? Maybe they have good interactions with the Expendables, right? No. Sylvester Stallone, at the very end of the first act, or I should say the beginning of the second act, he disbands the group. So the Expendables themselves aren't present throughout the entire second act. They return for the finale, but you have at least what felt like an hour of very little actual Expendables. Instead, it's this new group, and they're just boring. They don't really have any noticeable banter. Their interactions are dull. Their acting, it's not terrible, and I'll even say that Kellen Lutz does a much better job here than he did in The Legend of Hercules, but they aren't charismatic. You might say that Dolph Lundgren or any of those guys aren't very good actors, but at least they're interesting to watch. Their interactions are very compelling. They're very fun. And I will say with the first act, even though it was PG-13 and the lack of violence was annoying, their banter is just as good as it was in the previous films. So their sudden absence, that just makes it worse. I think I could have ultimately forgiven everything this movie did if they were just around during the second act. So God damn it. Sylvester Stallone, he gets more screen time than he does in the other films, simply because I don't think he ever actually leaves the screen, except when Mel Gibson has a few solo sequences with the other bad guys. And if you liked him in the other films, you'll like him here. But still, when he's playing off of these characters, there's just no chemistry. There's no spark. These interactions are incredibly boring, and that really drags down the movie. Between the first and second act, I should say that Kelsey Grammer has a small role where he's helping him recruit these guys. They could have easily cut that out. It had no bearing on the plot. Their interactions with each other, I mean, Stallone's and Grammer's, but at least they're compelling to watch. I enjoyed those sequences, which aren't necessary, but the scenes that are allegedly necessary are incredibly unenjoyable. There are two bright spots, however, during the second act. Antonio Banderas and Mel Gibson. Now, I was concerned that Mel Gibson would phone it in like he did with Machete Kills, but no, he goes all out, and I thought Mel Gibson was a blast. You know, he's both charming and funny, but he could also be very intense and sort of scary too. I was thrilled whenever he showed up on screen because, man, he stole the show. I almost wish there was more of him. They should have just focused entirely on Mel Gibson's side of the story, and the Expendables could be, you know, the villain protagonists. But also I thought Antonio Banderas was a lot of fun, and once again, fitting in with this movie's theme of teasing us with something better before focusing more on something worse. When Kelsey Grammer is introducing Stallone to, you know, all these new characters, Antonio Banderas is one of them, and he's very lively, he's very fun to watch. A lot of people, I think, will think he's annoying, but I personally just thought he was having a blast with the role, and his interactions with everybody, even the boring new characters, they kept my interest. But unfortunately, he's deemed too unstable to be part of the group, so he also vanishes up until the finale. But then, guess what? The finale, the third act, rolls around, and this is where the Expendables return, and they have to save the younger group, and the Expendables pretty much dominate all of the action. The younger group is definitely there, but they don't really do anything that you notice, whereas you pay attention to what everybody else is doing. So in a way, the second act was completely pointless too, because these characters who the film spent so much on, who were so boring, are just treated as afterthoughts and irrelevant during the finale. So this entire movie ended up being pointless because even the third act was unnecessary, because the third act is the payoff to the first two acts, and if the first two acts were unnecessary, then the third act was pointless too. This entire movie was totally superfluous. But I will say in itself, the third act was at least enjoyable because, once again, it's focusing on the characters I think the entire movie should have focused on, and they bring in, you know, everybody from Jet Li, who has like 3 lines. I actually thought they should have just retired Jet Li's character and, you know, found somebody else who could do, you know, actual fight scenes. But at the same time, I will concede that his moment with Arnold at the very end was very adorable. I totally ship that couple. What? Did the Expendables just suddenly get homoerotic on us? But that was kind of funny. And I actually thought Arnold Schwarzenegger did a lot better in this movie than he did in the Expendables 2. Even though he recycles that get back to the chopper line, it wasn't quite as obnoxious as his reliance on the "I'll be back" line from the previous film. But you know, Harrison Ford, he looks like he's having some fun, even though I watched Patriot Games the other day, and that was back when Harrison Ford actually seemed to enjoy acting, whereas now he just kind of goes through the motions, but it's still cool seeing him there. Am I forgetting anybody? If you like Terry Crews from the previous films, his screen time has been drastically reduced, even more so than the others, even though at least he has some importance to the plot. But otherwise, I think that's all I have to say. It was a failure. It just, even though it wasn't unenjoyable, there were times where I thought the film was just as good as its predecessors. If they just cut out the entire second act, even though it probably would have been a very short film, it would have been a very fun short film, even if it was PG-13. But unfortunately, it was just one bad idea after another bad idea, and you know, they should have trimmed some of these subplots and characters out. The people who wanted to make a true Expendables movie, they kept in what they must have wanted, but the people who wanted to do something different kept in what they wanted to, and none of it really worked well together. So that is all I have to say. I apologize about the length for this video. I had so much I wanted to talk about with this movie, yet so little. So I'm sure this review has come out across as a little bit jumbled, plus I'm kind of losing my voice because I've been talking so long. I did do a written review if you'd like to, you know, see my thoughts in a more coherent fashion. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook. Check out my website. God, I need a rest. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys later.